This is part 40 of ASP.NET MVC tutorial. In this video, we'll discuss display, display name, display format, and scaffold column attributes. Please watch part 39 before proceeding. For the purposes of this demo, we'll be using this table TBL employee. I'll have the SQL script available on my blog in case if you need it. To represent each employee within this table TBL employee, we need an employee entity class. And to generate the employee entity class, we're going to make use of ADO.NET Entity Framework. So let's flip to Visual Studio. Let's right click on the models folder, add a new item, and let's select data under install templates, ADO.NET Entity Data Model, and let's name this sample data model. Click add, and we want our model to generate from the database. Click next. Let's name our connection string as sample db context. Click next. This is going to connect to the database and retrieve all the tables, views, and stored procedures. And our table name here is TBL employee. And we want our entities to live in models namespace. Let's click finish. So this should generate an entity with name TBL employee, but we want our entity to actually be named as employee. So let's go ahead and change it accordingly. Save everything, and let's build our solution. And at this point, let's go ahead and add home controller, and let's select MVC controller with empty read write actions as the template. Click add. And now we are interested in implementing details action method. So we pass an employee ID. This method is going to retrieve the employee ID from the database, and then it's going to pass that employee object to the view. And this auto-generated entity class file is going to have our employee entity class. Notice that this employee class is actually implemented as a partial class. And notice the namespace, it's present in MVC demo.models. And since we want to use our employee class within the home controller, let's go ahead and include this namespace in the home controller. And let's create an instance of our sample db context class. And this class has got employees property, which is going to return the list of employees back, out of which we want a single employee, where the ID of the employee must be equal to whatever ID that we are passing into this details action method. And that's going to retrieve a single employee, which we are storing in this object, and then we will hand this object to the view. The next step is to actually add the details view. So let's right click on the details action method, add view. The name of the view is going to be details. We're going to make use of Razor View Engine, and we're going to create a strongly typed view against employee models class, and the scaffold template is going to be details. So this should add details view. And to set Arial as our font family, let's use a div tag here and specify the style attribute, and let's font family as Arial. Alright, with all these changes, let's build the solution. Let's run this and navigate to details action, and let's navigate to employee 1. Okay, so obviously here this view is not that pretty. First of all, look at the property name here, full name. We don't have a space between full and name. Let's say we want that property on the UI to be displayed like this, with a space in between full and name. How do we achieve that? We can make use of this display attribute. And now we need to apply these attributes to the properties of the employee class. But this employee class that is present in the sample data model.designer.cs, this is auto-generated file. So obviously if we make any customizations to this file, there's a disadvantage, because anytime this class is auto-generated again, we're going to lose all those customizations. That's why it's not a good practice to make any customizations to this auto-generated class. Because this class is implemented as a partial class, we can have another employee partial class, and then we can apply all our customizations there. So to our models folder, I'm going to add another class file, and I'm going to call this employee.cs. And this is the class which is going to contain all our customizations. So this is going to be another partial class. And then I'm going to create another class here, public class, and I'm going to call this employee metadata. So this class is actually going to contain the metadata related to the employee class. And then to associate this employee metadata class with employee partial class, I'm going to use metadata type attribute, and that attribute is present in system.componentModel.data annotations namespace. So now let's go ahead and use metadata type attribute, and then specify that this class is going to contain the metadata for employee class. Alright, so now we want to have a space on the full name property. So public string, the name of the property is full name, and let's have the get and set accessors. And now we are going to use that display attribute. So display attribute, and then this has a property, a named property, which is nothing but the name, and then you can specify whatever name you want. So I'm going to specify full name with a space in that. Let's build the solution, let's refresh this view, and we should get a space between full and name there. So look at that. And if you notice the way we have used this display attribute, look at this. You can either use the full name of the attribute, which is display attribute, or simply use display. Okay, we're going to have the same effect. And instead of using display attribute, there is another attribute to achieve the same thing. We can use display name attribute as well. The only difference between these two is that here we are using a named parameter, but whereas here we are passing the parameter, here we are not using a named parameter. It's as simple as that. Alright, now another interesting attribute that can be used to control the display is display format attribute. Okay, so if you look at higher date right here, look at that, we have date and time. Let's say instead of displaying date and time, we just want to display date, then we can use display format attribute and specify our data format string. And notice that we are using the data format string as 0:day, D for short date string. That's only the date part of date time. Again, display format can either be used like this, or you can use the full name of the attribute. We'll have the same output. On the other hand, if you want date and time, okay, here the time is in 24-hour notation, then you can use the data format string. Notice that 0: you're specifying dd, mm, yyyy, and since we are using capital H here for hours, we are going to get time in 24-hour notation. On the other hand, if you want time in 12-hour notation with AM and PM, you can use small case h there and tt. So all these customizations are possible using this display format attribute. Let's quickly look at that in action. So the type here is date time, and this is a nullable date time, and the name of the property is higher date. And we want to use display format attribute and specify data format string. Again, this is specified as a named parameter, and let's specify our data format string as 0:day. Let's build this, let's navigate to the view. Look at that, at the moment we have date and time, but we only want date part, so let's refresh this. So here notice that we only get the date part. Now if you navigate to employee 2 here, notice that for employee 2, Mary Jane, we don't have gender specified, that's stored as null. And then on the UI, instead of displaying null, let's say if for an employee gender is not specified, then I want to display gender not specified instead of the empty string there. How can we achieve that? Again, we can make use of display format attribute, and there is another parameter called null display text, where you can specify the text for any null value. Now here, since the property is gender, I am specifying the null display text as gender not specified. In this case, it's going to display that if the gender of the employee is null. So public string gender, and let's use display format attribute, and the parameter is null display text, and then we can say gender not specified. So let's build this. So at the moment, Mary Jane, since she doesn't have gender, no value is displayed there. But now when we refresh this, as you might expect, instead of the empty string, it should show gender not specified. Right. Another very useful attribute is scaffold column attribute. Okay. Now, if you don't want to display a column, then we can make use of scaffold column attribute. Let's say salary is confidential information. At the moment, notice that salary information is displayed, but for some reason we don't want salary column to be displayed in the view. Then you can control that using scaffold column attribute. All you need to specify is pass false as the value for this attribute, and it's not going to show that column. But however, this attribute is going to only work when you use display for model HTML helper. At the moment, if you look at the way this details view is implemented, this is an auto-generated view for us. Okay, now notice that first of all, it didn't generate a div tag for displaying ID, so we don't have ID there, but it has generated a div tag for salary. So that's the reason why we see salary there. Now if we apply the scaffold column attribute, if we apply this attribute to this employee class, it's not going to work. Okay, because let's actually look at that. So public int salary, and let's specify the scaffold column attribute, and then pass false. So we don't want to scaffold the column. Let's build a solution. Let's go back, refresh this. Notice that at the moment we have salary displayed, but even after refreshing the view, we still have salary specified, but we have used the scaffold column attribute. Okay, so why is the salary being still being displayed? That's because the scaffold column attribute will only work when you use display for model HTML helper. Okay, so instead of all this HTML that we have right here, I can get the same output using just one line, display for model using HTML helper. So add HTML dot display for model HTML helper. So this helper is going to go through each property, and then it's going to render the UI for us automatically. So let's build this. Let's go back to the view and let's refresh this. And look at that, salary is not displayed now, but then ID is displayed again. Okay, if you remember with the previous implementation of this view, we didn't have this problem because the auto-generated view, it didn't generate a div tag for ID, so it didn't display that. But this display for model, is displaying ID there. Let's say we don't want the ID also to be displayed. All we need to do is have ID property and specify scaffold column attribute on that property as well. Alright, in our next video, we'll discuss data type and display column attributes. On this slide, you can find resources for ASP.NET C# and SQL Server interview questions. That's it for today. Thank you for listening. Have a great day.